Hello, everyone. I am sitting here on Zoom with Erden Zikibay. Erden, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Definitely. Let me go ahead. I have my list of questions here. So to get started, to give everybody a little bit of context. So Erden, he is an awesome illustrator and animator, and a lot of his work has a lot of different themes involved, but you really, when I take a look at his work, I really see a lot of themes of identity, themes of his cultural heritage. So I really wanted to kind of dive deep into it today. So he and I actually started talking after the release of the recent Borat film, Borat 2. And Yerden and I kind of had some very strong opinions about the film that we kind of bonded over. So just to give everybody a little bit of background about him, Yerden, can you go ahead and let us know about your identity, where you're from, and also give us a little bit of information about what you kind of have to say about the Borat films and all of the work that you were kind of doing to highlight true Kazakh culture in light of these kind of stereotypes that in the conversation that we had about that.
Thank you so much, Valeria. I'm originally from Kazakhstan, and I did my undergrad and grad school in the States, and then went back to Kazakhstan to work. And the way I feel about Borat is, I would say, a big part of my adult identity, because most of my adulthood I was living in the post-Borat time. And so I was always exposed to it. And yeah, I think in a way it made me who am I, maybe gave me some purpose in terms of just being more passionate about expressing my culture, sharing it with the rest of the world, just because I felt there was so much misinformation that I had to sort of overcome. And especially being an artist, I felt like there was a big responsibility to undo that effect that was done by Sacha Baron Cohen. Yeah.
Awesome. And so can you go into a little bit now about your work as an illustrator, why you chose illustration as your medium, and kind of a little bit of background of how you approach your artistic medium?
So my major is actually new media art, and we studied everything from video art to animation to graphic design, motion graphics, and illustration. And so I really I just usually just call myself an artist, because for me, the most important thing is the message, and the medium for me is just a tool. So I mean, I have so many tools that I can choose from. So for me, it's not really important what tool I use, as long as I can get my message across. And oftentimes, the just easiest way would be a 2D a 2D art. So let's say a graphic design or illustration, just because it's so much faster to create versus motion graphics or an animation, just because they're more time consuming. So yeah, animation is for me is one of the most perfect mediums, because it engages your visual, auditory senses, and it's a time-based medium, right? So it's you see things changing over time, and I think if you know, but ideally it should be done in a team where you can just pull a bunch of forces together and create some story in pretty short time. And for individual person, it just takes a lot more time. And sometimes when in a fast-paced world like ours, especially a lot of my personal art is very reactive to current events. Right. So I just don't have enough time to put together something like an animation to respond to some issue that's happening at this very moment.
Right. And so can you give us a little bit, some examples, because you did mention that a lot of your work is very like current events based. So can you kind of describe like a recent work that you did or some project that you have coming up that's like in relation to some of these events that you're referring to?
Yeah, so one of the pieces I did this year is regarding African American or Black characters in animation. Mm-hmm. And it happened earlier this year when I saw a movie called Spies in Disguise with Will Smith. And I just noticed this pattern where this major animation studios would feature their first Black protagonist. Mm-hmm. Like Princess and Frog earlier in 2009, mm-hmm. and in 2009, I believe it was 2020, it was Spies in Disguise. And mm-hmm. also this year, there's a first Black protagonist coming up in a Pixar movie mm-hmm. called Soul. So seeing Spies in Disguise, and actually I timed on my phone the screen time when the character of Will Smith was in the shape of a human, because there's this sort of troubling trope that I saw happening, where they would spend most of the time as non-human, Frog and Princess and Frog, and Pigeon and Spies in Disguise, mm-hmm. and then a soul in the new movie, the upcoming movie. And I actually timed the screen time, and it was like something like 45% or something. It was 60-something% for Princess and the Frog. And knowing that Soul is gonna come out this summer, I was like, I need to like put it together. I need to like get it out there so people could share it. People could like, you could actually speak to big companies this way if you gain enough traction. So I was like, how can I put it together? And then immediately I have the connection to a movie, Get Out, so where it's a big cultural phenomena that highlighted the Black experience. So I sort of connected it to that imagery from that movie. And it was very popular. It went viral. People shared it, and surprisingly, a lot of people share it in Brazil. I just realized how big of a problem of Black representation is also in Brazil, which has, I believe, the largest Black diaspora in the world. Oh, wow. So, yeah, and so that was like one of the things that happened. Another thing that happened was the human rights violation, the crimes against humanity in Western China against the Uyghur minority, I guess, against the Kazakh minority, my own people who live in China. And so I wanted to talk about that. So I put together an illustration that also highlighted that. So usually it's something that is so pressing and so immediate, where you need to just like get it. I mean, for me, it's something like it just, once it dawns on me, I cannot like function properly. I need to get it out of my system and get it out there so other people can see it, other people can discuss it, and something can be made of, something can be done about it.
Right. Thank you for that. So let's go into, I did ask you a little bit at the beginning to kind of go into your ethnic origin, and you gave me a little bit about Borat, but how does your like kind of identity as a Kazakh person, as someone from Kazakhstan, and also because Kazakhstan has this big history with, you know, the Soviet Union, also as somebody in this kind of post-Soviet, post-colonial world, how does that play into your art? If you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so interestingly, even with the Borat conversation, I noticed that a lot of other people in other former Soviet republics, they seem not to understand why Kazakhs are so upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it stems from the big difference that the Kazakh experience has from other ex-Soviet people's experiences. So being a Kazakh in Kazakhstan is much more different. Was much more different than being in an Armenia, or let's say I don't know, Uzbek in Uzbekistan.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing that you have to understand the history. So the big thing that really shaped Kazakh history was the man-made famine in the 30s, when Kazakh population was decimated. And because we used to be nomads, when our livestock was confiscated, people just had no other means to survive, because they did not know agriculture and everything. So they starved to death, and a lot of people fled the country. And so Kazakhs, in a matter of, I believe, like a decade, they became a minority in their own country. Around 30%, I believe, in the 1950s. And so compared to like other ethnic groups who had their own republics, like Georgians or Kyrgyz or Tajiks, right? This was not their experience. They never had that sort of feeling disempowered, but also feeling there was a huge disconnection with the previous generation, because so many people were traumatized by the famine, that there was a big sort of that the link was broken between generations, and a lot of the culture was not translated to the next generation. For example, I went to grade school in independent Kazakhstan, and because my grandfather was a Kazakh-speaking journalist and a poet, he insisted that I went to a Kazakh-speaking school. So I speak Kazakh, but my parents did not speak Kazakh. They speak it on a very sort of rudimental level, but I can speak really good Kazakh to my grandparents. So, but they cannot speak Kazakh as good as I do. So there's a huge generational gap, even just within my family. And I'm not even talking about other families where that gap was not even like mended, right? The grandkids would go to a Russian-speaking school, so they would never return back to Kazakh language. So that complex identity sort of, I think, just feeling that disempowerment as a minority in the country that has the name of your people, I think it's a very big part of just growing up Kazakh, but also not just the ethnic identity, but also the time when I was born. I was born in the Perestroika time, so I saw the very end of the Soviet experience, but also saw the independent Kazakhstan, how we would have for our first money, how we'd first have our flag. That all happened when as I was growing up. So I saw this nation building happening in front of my eyes. My grandfather was one of the journalists who advocated for the capital to be moved to north to Astana because of geopolitics mostly. So just this. The time when everything was changing and seeing all these changes, and it really affected me and my art. One of the things I also wanted to say is when I was 15, I read this little book about student demonstration against like a Moscow in 1986. So it was I was a baby, but it was a big student demonstration against some kind of law, the Moscow policy. And the demonstration was crashed by the security forces. And nobody told me about this demonstration. Nobody told me about this big protest that was crushed. And so learning it from a book was like, wow, it was so eye-opening. And I would interrogate my relatives, be like, where were you when this happened? What were you doing? And they'll be like, oh, like, and it was like really uncomfortable for them to talk about it, because people who were participating in the protests, they were persecuted. They were politically repressed. They were, they were shunned by the authorities. So even the Soviet Union collapsed, people still had that stigma about this protest. And for me, I think also reflected, it also kind of influenced how I saw history. For me, history was not something set in stone. It was something that was almost like archaeology. There was always like different layers, and like you have to like dig a little deeper to find some more. And it's when we now find out about different things about the past, for me it's fascinating always, because I'm like, wow, like this is amazing that we can still learn about things and grow. And so yeah, I think history is a big part of my art, again because of that experience when I was 15, finding out something that happened in my hometown and I had no idea about.
Wow. Yeah, I resonate with what you said, because even though where I was born, Dagestan, it's a part of Russia still, but that like my parents don't speak my ethnic language either, right? It's really something that I had to go to my grandparents to understand, what that history was. So it's interesting, because I will talk to somebody from like Armenia or Azerbaijan or Tajikistan, and everybody still speaks Russian mostly, especially if because I'm in the US, especially if they're in the US, most people kind of came in the 90s. It was still very early on in that post-Soviet period, so people still came with like, a lot of the Russian. But it's interesting because I do start to see that there's some sort of disconnect between me as like a minority within Russia and, and as somebody who was born in Azerbaijan, and their language, like they still, have access to their language and everything, because, they were kind of, comfortable enough to be a majority, and their parents, are still fluent in it. So that's really interesting, because I didn't have that experience. Like my family is very much firmly speaking Russian, and our ethnic language is kind of like it's like, it's more of the grandparents' language and that sort of thing. So that was really interesting. And I did hear that, like, even like the population of ethnic Russians in Kazakhstan is, this might be wrong, so let me know if it's wrong, but is the population of ethnic Russians in Kazakhstan as like high as like 40%, or is that like what are
right now it's about 25-ish.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure where I heard 40. Maybe it was in some specific city or town, but it's really interesting. And also I find that when I meet somebody who is from Kazakhstan, they speak Russian like really, really well, whereas somebody from Tajikistan might not speak Russian that well, right? So it's I've seen that a little bit in what you said.
And a lot of Kazakhs pride themselves in speaking Russian without accent. That is like one of the things that they were instilled with, right? Not just speak Russian, but don't speak with an accent.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, because then again, like I'm going back to even just my own experience, and my grandmother, she always talks about how uneducated her mother is, my great grandmother, and my grandma always says, "Ой, моя мама А и Б не знала, и смотри, как я, like, look how good I'm speaking not English, Russian, because even though it was her second language, she speaks it so well." So that's really, it's like a very colonial mindset. So why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that the Russian language has this kind of effect on these sort of minorities who have since kind of, distanced themselves from it, but why does it still have that effect?
Well, I think the main thing is just practical effect. I often talk to my maternal grandfather, who's still around. He's 85 years old, and he talks about, well, that how, for such a big essentially an empire to function, you would need one language. So
Right.
let's say a Tajik could speak to an Estonian, you know, Moldovan can speak to a Yakut, or so it makes sense in practical terms. But another way, big thing that also happened is, for example, my grandpa would say that when they had big sort of celebration related like meetings at work, they would finish all their meetings with like almost like a slogan, like a motto saying, long live the great Russian nation or Russian people, the sort of the constructor and inspiration of our victories. And so this sort of supremacy of ethnic Russians and their language. You know, the Soviet anthem starts with the words, this great union was united by great Rus. So I think it made sense that, you know, I think it started with Stalin actually, because before Stalin, to my knowledge, Lenin was very much against giving supremacy to one ethnic group. But after Stalin, it was all about like, you know, the older brother policy. They would actually refer to Russians as older brothers. And I think that's what George Orwell was satirizing in his Animal Farm, where all animals I create are equal, except some animals are more equal. I think that was also one of the things that he was sort of making fun of. So yeah, in Kazakhstan, it was essentially like accent is an interesting psychological thing. Accent is a way of sort of resisting a language where you speak it, but you don't take it as your own. You're like still, no, that's not mine, and like you're still like pushing back against it. So, and in Russia, they would always laugh about like Estonian accent. They would often laugh about Caucasian accent, right, from people from Caucasus. That was like a big thing. But I think it's very telling that these groups, they still had so much pride about their own identity that they never accepted Russian as their own. Whereas I feel like with Kazakhs, because first of all, just numerically, we became such a small group, but also culturally, because of that big break with the previous generations. You know, not even that, I forgot to mention that nomadic culture was destroyed. So for example, the person who first came up with the word genocide, he actually, original author of the word genocide, he included cultural destruction as part of genocide. So the American historian Sarah Cameron actually says that if we take that definition of genocide, the man-made famine was genocide, because culture was attacked. The way of life, the nomadic way of life was attacked. Whereas later, when the UN came up with the definition of genocide, it was taken away. There was no cultural aspect. It was only like mostly physical aspect. So Kazakh culture and a Kazakh way of life as a nomadic group, as a nomadic people for millennia, right? That was destroyed. So, which never happened to Tajiks or Armenians or, you know, Baltic people. And so Kazakh in a way accepted Russian as their own. In a way, it was a sign of defeat.
Wow. And so do you see that rebuilding? Because, you know, obviously, like I try to keep up every now and then with you know, various nations of Central Asia and the Caucasus, because I feel like these cultures are so underrepresented. And I read that it must have been a couple years back that like that the language was converted back from the Cyrillic kind of Russian-based alphabet to Latin. Has that stuck around? And like, do you see other efforts being made to kind of reunite and kind of take pride in that, in the culture of being a Kazakh?
Yeah, the Latin conversion to Latin is a big
Yeah.
pain of mine because it's been done so terribly.
Okay.
They are currently using a third version, third official version, and it's still not working out. They're thinking about redoing it. So I hope they would create a cohesive version.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea behind it is correct. I mean, they're trying to sort of undo the what happened in the Soviet times, which is switch to Cyrillic, because we already used Latin before Cyrillic.
Mm-hmm.
And so the and obviously behind it, I think the big thing is to officially they talk about making Kazakh closer to the global world, which mostly uses Latin script. But in a way, it is, I think, a move away from Russian sphere of influence, which I think the war in Ukraine was a big wake-up call for a lot of people when they saw that there would be this conflict between these two Slavic people, right? I mean, what is there to hold Russia against attacking Kazakhs, right? So I think there's a lot of efforts that are happening to weaken all the ties in case of if there's any like sort of informational war that might happen. So they're all, I feel like they're trying to sort of prevent those things. Yeah, there is a big push to return to Kazakh, and if I was much more scared like 10 years ago, and again I use the word scared because there's a lot of fear for Kazakh language being extinct, because a lot of people say that if we did not gain independence in 91, we would have lost the language, because the Russification, the assimilation was so strong, especially in the cities. Cities that's where the big cultural stuff happens, right? Kazakhs were a minority. I mean, in the 80s, Kazakhs were 16% of Almaty, the capital population. Wow. So, and there was only, I believe, 2 grade schools in Kazakh language in the capital, in Almaty, in the Soviet times. So there was a fear. My grandpa, his whole generation, I grew up living with them because I was kind of adopted by my grandparents according to Kazakh traditions. So I grew up with all these like literature people, all these like journalists and stuff. There was a lot of pain and fear for Kazakh because, first of all, we gained independence in 91, and then we were hoping, okay, now we can revive our language, but then all this like international stuff comes pouring in, that Kazakh becomes really hard to compete against all that pressure from like Hollywood, which is all translated into Russian. So people are watching Hollywood movies in Russian, right? So only now, in the last maybe 10 years, there's a big push to sort of return to Kazakh. Now, for example, there's a great effort that I support to translate Hollywood movies in Kazakh, like dub them actually in Kazakh language. And I always love going there because it's, for me, it's such an amazing experience. Like I was telling how I was watching James Bond in Kazakh, and so the beginning of the movie is all action, and there's like no words spoken. And then at one point, the girl says something in Kazakh, and the whole audience starts laughing, and the reason they laugh is because they're not used to hearing people like major Hollywood actors speaking in Kazakh, right? But so it was like and oftentimes where we hear Kazakh before that was in like sort of humorous dubbing, where people would like have a very funny voiceover over some clips, and it was all funny. That's why I feel like when people laughed, it was just sort of like this. They didn't know how to react, and so after that, there was no more laughing because they were just kept watching the movie, and it just made the movie so much more relatable. And I don't know, it's hard to explain that feeling to somebody who has not had their language so marginalized. Like a Russian speaking would never understand that feeling, right? And not even English speaking. So for me, seeing all these movies in Kazakh was amazing. And so I don't have any much fears anymore. My fear is not that Kazakh language would survive. My fear right now is what would be spoken in Kazakh in the future. And because what I'm seeing right now is sometimes on social media, you see hate speech against, ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, other people who don't think like majority does, or some people do. And so they, spew hateful stuff. And oftentimes it's in Kazakh, and that makes me very, very worried about not the future of language, but the future of the content of the language.
Right. And I see even also in kind of Russian spaces online, and because I'm sure, many Kazakhs speak, most Kazakhs speak Russian. And, like in my own family, I mean, I see sometimes, my parents are not the kind of people that would spew hate speech, but even just somebody that they know that person knows will post a meme that's like very insensitive to, like you said, any one thing. And oftentimes it's in Russian. And then I think from there, because so many people still speak Russian from these various places, it might get disseminated out even further into all these other languages. So I think there's I see what you're saying is, with regard to like misinformation and like kind of the, bad actors online kind of trying to get people to think in a certain way. And another thing about what you said with the language marginalization, so for my own ethnic language, we call it Juhuri. That same thing that you said, that it was often very funny clips, like they would take a random movie that's like funny. It could be a Russian movie, it could be a Hollywood movie, and they just dub it with, like some random person, in the community will just dub it themselves with something funny. And so that's really interesting that you said that, because like you said, that most people wouldn't understand. And like, I really understand, because I see, I see that in my own community. Okay, so let's go a little bit into your art. So, you have these like kind of influences of current events, political issues, cultural issues. How do you frame something? Like how does where do you kind of get that inspiration? Like what kind of triggers you into that sort of creative thought? What makes you think, okay, this is what I want to talk about? And then how do you frame that? How do you decide what content to put into the illustration or into the animation? What's your process about that like?
So, like, let's say one of the pieces I did a couple of years ago was about Coco. And when I watched that movie, I saw that sort of the cult of ancestors, how they sort of were, connecting with their ancestors. And for me, I grew up with the similar cult in my own people. They have similar ideas about the spirit of the ancestors. I think they also had that similar thing in Mulan, where the ancestors woke up and talked to each other and stuff. So it's interesting, because like you don't really see that idea in like sort of Judeo-Christian or Islamic worlds, because it's it's not there. So seeing this ideas that also kind of resonate with your own experience growing up, it was like, wow, like I could actually talk about my culture through something that was already mainstream, that's something people had a knowledge of. So I was doing a lot of research about how they had this Dia de Muertos, where they had special bread that they baked, and we actually also have a bread that we make to remember the ancestors. And so there's an interesting connection there. And we also go to the cemeteries. And in our culture, cemeteries actually don't have a negative connotation the way I saw in, like, you know, Hollywood movies where cemeteries are scary, right? You know, you have Halloween, you know,
Yeah.
zombies and all this stuff. And cemeteries in our culture are, you know, place you go to talk to your ancestors, to you know, make sure, you know, their graves are all nicely kept and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting. So when I see things like that.
So we kind of went into Borat. The last thing I wanted to touch on is you call yourself an educator and that you have art with a purpose. So I think we touched on some of this stuff about, you know, taking current events issues and, you know, shedding a new light on it through your work. But I know that also you've done some talks and you've spoken to like different groups. So can you talk about some of what you do as an educator?
I think I started becoming an educator when I was like 26. I started volunteering at the summer camp for American kids who were adopted from Kazakhstan.
Mm.
And so for me, being growing up in Kazakhstan and having such a strong connection to Kazakhstan, I was like, it was such a perfect place for me where I could share my knowledge and my experiences. And again, because those are kids, you know, Gen Zers, they're so into like electrical electronic stuff, and I had to find like a lot of new creative ways to tell them what I wanted to tell them in an interesting way, in an engaging way. And later I taught college students, I taught K to 12 students in Kazakhstan. And just education is it's for me, it's not just explaining tools. For me, oftentimes it's to spark interest. I'm very blessed with having amazing educators myself, who really made sure I not just created beautiful stuff or, you know, nice and shiny stuff or something mind-blowing, but something that had a heart in it, something that had a you know, passion behind it, that just to show something that showed that I cared. And I feel the same way. I feel like it's like this light that I need to like pass on to the next generation, because there's so much cynicism in the world and so much just like nihilism, right? Like that nothing matters, everything is bad, and like, you know, there's nothing we can do about it. And in fact, you know, there's so much stuff that people can do, even just by like liking or sharing or commenting. You know, you can give power to so many people. So yeah, it's the big things that I try to sort of teach is empathy and solidarity. Just to understand that, first of all, just to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I mean, I'm not religious, but for me, golden rule is something I try to live by, is to treat others the way you want to be treated yourself. And yeah, and also just, you know, try to support somebody you don't know, and somebody it just feels so good when you have that, you know, somebody supporting you in difficult times. And yeah, even with this whole Borat thing, as one scholar, she's a Kazakh lady, her name is Aizada Arstanbek, she said, empathizing with others is not much, is not a question of intellect, but it's a question of kindness. And I think that's why, I mean, I mean, we need smart people, but we also need like people who have a heart.
I wanted to ask you, what are some of your next projects that you're working on, if you could share that?
I have a project I started a couple of years ago It's a feminist blog where I try to showcase issues in Kazakhstan and issues of women's rights in Kazakhstan, again, because I feel like there's a gap, especially in Kazakh language, where those issues are not being raised. And there's so many activists, young activists who are doing this stuff. And I'm somebody who is plugged in so many different like cultures. I feel like I could be of some use, and especially with my skills and stuff. One of the questions that you had in earlier was what are the benefits and drawbacks of being plugged into different like regions and cultures. Is I wanted to say is the benefits is that I once described it as when you leave one country and go back to another country, or go back living in different countries, it's like when you leave Matrix and go to the real world. Except like the real world is not real, it's also a matrix. So you're like living in different matrices where they have their own like rules. But the rules in one matrix do not apply in a different matrix. So you constantly realize that everything is arbitrary. I mean, all this human laws, human societal pressure, societal norms are all arbitrary. And it gives you a lot of freedom to realize, hey, like, this is not real. Because I know, because I've seen the other places, it's not real. It doesn't work there. So, but also gives you a bit of alienation where you're like, oh wow, like how can I relate? How can I explain some things? At one point, I remember in Kazakhstan, people, when you said democracy, people thought something like anarchy. They thought democracy is something like so dangerous and bad. So yeah, it's really hard to explain some ideas like human rights or, you know, equality between genders and stuff. And or, you know, sometimes in the Western world, it's hard to explain why, you know, making fun of Kazakhstan is a bad thing. You know, people cannot fathom why it's a bad thing. So it's, I think another drawback is when you're sort of not fully in one society, you're always sort of somewhere in between, and you cannot fully commit to one society or the other in terms of like all your heart, and that's really hard.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that, because I find myself nodding like all the time to everything you're saying, because I really see this. I think it's, you know, I wasn't born in the US. I grew up most of my life in the US, but even still, even, you know, just having a foreign family that kind of displaces you from the place that you're supposed to kind of identify more with. When I went to Israel, for example, I lived in Israel, and I also, I lived in Vietnam also for half a year. And it's interesting, you know, in Vietnam, they saw me as an Israeli because I was traveling with my Israeli husband. In Israel, they saw me as an American. In the US, they see me as like this foreigner. We're not really sure. Every time I get asked, like, where are you from? Italy, Turkey, Russia. Ambiguous, exactly. Like Greece, you know, all sorts of things. So it's like you're always trying to manage these kind of expectations, societal expectations, societal norms, and then you feel like you have to answer on behalf of, you know, like your entire demographic, whoever you're representing at the time, whether it's you're now you're being seen as, okay, you're Westerner American. What do Americans think about this? Now you're from Russia, or you're from, you know, from the Caucasus, or you're Middle Eastern. Like, what do you say about this? So it's really interesting.
You're the ambassador.
All the time, right? You have to negotiate those territories. So it's really nice to kind of have this conversation with you, because I think that we can kind of see in those similar veins. Yeah. Okay, I think those are all of my questions. So thank you for taking the time out of your very busy.
Thank you so much, Valeria.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, stay in touch.
It was a pleasure.
Awesome. I'm glad.